listening to the weekly podcast wrap-up of Jedi News UK with your host, Teresa Delgado.
My name is Teresa Delgado. I'm a staff writer for Jedi News, and I'm going to be bringing you our podcast review wrap-up. Our third podcast for this wrap-up is Rebel Force Radio's Star Wars Declassified. On this show, they review Clone Wars episodes, very similar to We Talk Clones, but they do theirs differently, obviously, because this is Jason and Jimmy Mac of Rebel Force Radio. On this particular episode, which is also titled To Catch a Jedi, because this one is about the episode To Catch a Jedi, they have on fangirl blogger Trisha Barr from fangirlblog.com, and also a Clone Wars writer named Stephen Melching. And most notably, he did Rookies. He did a lot other episodes, and I learned during this particular review of To Catch a Jedi that he actually has episodes in the first 4 seasons, so that's pretty cool. The one thing I would like to note about Rebel Force Radio is that they have done a lot for the Star Wars community. So it's really nice to be able to have them on this wrap-up and to be able to talk about the new things that they're doing, and they're very good friends of Jedi News, so I definitely wanted to feature them on this first wrap-up. The first thing that I always notice about Jason and Jimmy is the passion for Star Wars that they have. And it definitely came out in this episode right from the get-go because of the uncertain future of the Clone Wars. Jimmy was very, very adamant about getting people to write into Disney and to Bob Iger about the Clone Wars and about keeping it going. And I 100% agree with them, and I really feel their passion, and I'm so glad that they mentioned this and that they did spend a good little time on it. I do wonder, though, whether or not it should have gone at the beginning or should have gone at the end, but it doesn't really matter where it is, because the one thing it did do by being at the very beginning of this episode is that it really caught my attention, and I was really listening. So that was spot on, guys. Good job. Another thing was, I just want to acknowledge Trisha on this particular episode. She did an amazing job. She had great insight into the episodes, and she made a lot of really good points. The one thing, I'm going to go in order of their episode, but she had a really great analysis of the female aspect of Ahsoka being brought into the Clone Wars and referenced it back to Mara Jade and how a lot of people were a little bit cautious of Mara Jade and didn't really know what to do with her, and that was the same way it was with Ahsoka. But now both of these characters are beloved characters in the Star Wars universe, so that was pretty cool. I also really liked Jimmy's tie-in of Luke and his immaturity that we see in A New Hope to Ahsoka's youth at the beginning of the Clone Wars, and how they've both grown through the process. And I know Jason also had a lot to say on this topic as well, and it was very interesting for me to be able to look at it from that perspective, because I hadn't really thought about the growth of Ahsoka in that way before. The way we see Luke grow through the original trilogy, we've also seen that with Ahsoka. There was something really interesting about this particular episode of Clone Wars Declassified. While in We Talk Clones, they do read the Jedi fortune cookie, in this particular episode of Rebel Force Radio, they brought up the Jedi fortune cookie, but they also talked about it in reference to the episode and how they felt, whether it fit and how it would affect the show and the characters. And so I thought that was really neat, and I definitely think that's something that should be done, because I have always really loved the fortune cookies at the beginning, and I always try to apply them to the episode once I've seen the episode. So I think that would be a really cool aspect for shows that are reviewing Clone Wars episodes to try and do that. Maybe do it at the end of the show, but either way, it would be really cool. Once again, as far as the flow of the conversation, they did a great job with this particular episode. I think they did really good justice to the Clone Wars by having Stephen Melching on the show, because he is a writer for the Clone Wars, and he does understand the process of the show, and he's been with the show from the very beginning. So now that we're getting to this climactic point in the show, I think it was really good to have him on and to give some perspective and to help us begin to try and understand what is going to happen with the Clone Wars, or at least what he thinks might happen based off of what he knows. So I think that was really well done. The pick of the guests for this particular show was really great. And I also really like how they cue in people when they're doing this roundtable type discussion. They always have questions queued up for certain people, and Jason and Jimmy do a great job as hosts of making sure that that person knows that they're talking to them and that they want them to answer this or that question. And I really like that, and I think it really guides the discussion very, very well. It's kind of interesting, too, that in this particular Clone Wars episode, we now have in the mention of the video game 1313 twice in 2 review podcasts. So for me, that's kind of interesting that 1313 is on people's minds and that they are noticing it in reference to the Clone Wars cartoon. And it's also interesting that as I'm doing these reviews, there was news about video game 1313. So I just think all of that is a really cool coincidence. Overall, this episode had a really good flow, and they did a really good job interacting with the guests. I also really like that in this episode, there was some definite disagreement on the topic of Asajj Ventress between Jimmy Mack and Jason, and they really had some fun discussing and getting at it with each other, and it really livened up this episode quite a bit, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So, great job. As far as my rating on a scale of 1 to 10 of this particular episode, I'm going to have to give this one a 9.5. It was really well done. It was really entertaining, and I had a great time listening to it. If you have not gotten a chance to listen to either of Rebel Force Radio shows, just the regular weekly Rebel Force Radio or their Clone Wars Declassified, then please, please, please make sure to tune in to it. You can go to rebelforceradio.com, but they still have a splash page up, so you're not going to find much there. You can find them on Rebel Force Radio on Facebook. They do have a pretty active Facebook page, which is really nice. You can communicate with the guys through there. They also are on Twitter, and you can follow them at Rebel Force Radio. So they make it pretty easy for you. Facebook, Twitter, and iTunes is where you can find their shows. Go in, tune in, and listen to Rebel Force Radio. And the fourth and final podcast that I'm going to be reviewing on this particular wrap-up is Full of Sith, a brand new podcast to the Star Wars universe. They've just put out their 11th episode, and they've gotten some really awesome reviews in the Star Wars community. It's probably one of the few Star Wars podcasts that has come out and has really come out with a bang. The hosts of Full of Sith are the Mike Pilot, Brian Young, Concetta Parker, Bobby Roberts, and Travis Johnson. So these people make up a really good panel of hosts. When I first started listening to them, I was a little worried about there being too many voices going on. But turns out it's a really good, balanced viewpoints. And so I really do like that. On this episode, which is episode 11, they have on Brian Truitt he's an entertainment writer for USA Today, and he comes on and they talk everything under the sun. This was a very interesting episode because they did tangent off from Star Wars for a good long while as they talked about Brian's personal career history, where he came from, how he almost became a professional musician, and a lot of really cool things. And for once, I actually really didn't have a problem with a Star Wars podcast that deviated away from Star Wars, because I felt like I was really getting to know somebody who has done a lot of cool stuff for Star Wars in his writing and interviews, and it really helped me to get to know him better and to really understand why he's a great advocate for Star Wars and why he's such a big Star Wars fan. Something that really popped up for me was when they asked him who, out of all the people he's interviewed and talked to in the entertainment world, who he thinks would be good for the new Star Wars movies that has not previously been a part of Star Wars. And I thought it was very interesting that pretty much the entire cast from Friday Night Lights came up. So I think that's pretty cool because it's a really good crossover of actors and stuff that maybe, or people that Star Wars fans haven't really seen that could show up in these films and that someone really thinks would do a very good job. So that's pretty neat. Also, I just wanted to point out that the only negative that I had to this show was the kind of all over the placeness of it. It didn't really feel super organized, but that's the only thing for me, and maybe it's because of the break to go and talk about Brian's life and how he became a writer for USA Today and all that kind of stuff, and maybe that was kind of part of it, but I do like how they segued from talking about his musician background into talking about the musicians that could possibly work on the new Star Wars trilogy. So that was pretty interesting and pretty good, and I really liked that. I also liked that they do try to get to listeners' voicemails, and that was pretty neat. And on this show, it was a voicemail from the Bearded Trio, which was pretty cool to hear, as I've just gotten to know who they are. And so I think that's one of the cool things about all of this podcasting stuff is that everybody sort of ends up overlapping, and it's pretty neat to be able to hear different people that you know on different shows. And I've gotten to know Concetta Parker through Twitter and Brian Young, and it's been really cool to get to know them through Twitter. So getting to really indulge myself in their podcast to be able to review it was really fun for me. I can say this about Full of Sith. It is one of the better Star Wars podcasts out there. It is still new. They're still growing. They're still trying to find their groove, and I think that they're doing a really good job. I really enjoyed the original, or the first 3 episodes, and I really enjoyed getting to know all of the people on the show that are just the host. I think that was really cool. Also this week, I'm not reviewing it, but they had another release, which was their Rancho Obi-Wan Spectacular, so that was pretty cool. I have listened to it. It was a really cool episode. You should go check it out. But back to this particular episode, I think they did a really great job with this particular interview. They really took the time to get to know Brian, and they just showed some great perspective on the world of Star Wars, talking about characters and those kind of things. And Brian was a very interesting subject to listen to, and to hear his views on Star Wars, and to hear that he didn't really see the first Star Wars movie in the theater because he was only 1 year old. And a lot of times when we have guests and stuff on podcasts, they're definitely guests of the original trilogy era that have seen the films from their inception when they first came out. So that was pretty nice. Also, it was pretty nice to hear that everybody's favorite music pieces, if you listen to the very end, everybody had at least something coming from the prequel trilogy, and I really liked that Across the Stars was mentioned, as well as Anakin's theme from The Phantom Menace. So I thought that was really cool. So great job, guys. You did a wonderful job, and as always, I commend you on getting out there in the Star Wars podcasting universe and bringing something new, something fresh, and it's really, really awesome. On this particular episode, I would give an 8.5 out of 10, just because I've enjoyed some of the other episodes more, but still, you need to go check out Full of Sith. They are on iTunes. They are also on Twitter. You can find them at Full of Sith. You can also find them on their Facebook page, which is just search for Full of Sith and you'll find their Facebook page. And all of the hosts have their own Twitter, so you can find them via their own Twitter handles. But you can check them out on fullofsith.com, which is a really cool website. It looks really cool, and it really gives some interesting perspective into the show, and you can get to know all of the different hosts via the website, so they are really reaching out to the fan community. So go check out Full of Sith. Well, guys, that's it for this particular episode of the podcast wrap-up for Jedi News UK. Thanks for joining me. Hopefully you enjoyed what I had to say, and hopefully it gave you some perspective into just a few podcasts that are out there in the Star Wars universe. If you haven't heard of them, make sure you go and listen to them, and make sure to rate them and review them, because everybody needs those ratings and reviews on iTunes, and pass along some good words to your friends, because these are great podcast hosts that are producing some great stuff in the Star Wars universe for everyone to listen to. So get on out there, check them out. Hopefully you love them, and we will see you next week.